James was soon re-railed and taken to the works to be looked over. After the inspection, the red engine was asked to take a passenger train when he got back to Knapford. The run helped ease James's nerves, and he soon forgot about what he thought he had seen. A few days later, the young man came to see James and his crew at the sheds. He was there to show them the pictures he had taken.
"Check this one out first,"
he said as he passed them the photo he had taken of James and his crew. In the photo, they saw James and his crew with the smelter shed behind them. But next to James, with just a corner sticking out, was a faded-looking tender. It wasn't very clear, and it was a little transparent, like it had passed by the camera too quickly to be clearly captured.
"Now what's that? It looks like an engine tender."
I was the only one there.
James said, rolling his eyes.
Your camera must be faulty or something.
"And that's not all."
The young man continued. He had brought his camera to the crew. The display screen showed one of the sheds in the ironworks, one of the yard lights, and piles of twisted scrap. It was all barely visible through the thick fog, the young man quickly explained.
"I was messing with some of the settings and forgot I'd switched it from picture mode to film mode. I tried to take a still picture, but it wouldn't click like it usually would, so I took out my second camera and went to photograph something else. I was only away for a few moments before... well... watch."
He hit play on the camera, and the film played. The picture shuddered as if the camera was sat down. The voice of the man bemoaning his apparent misfortune, followed by the sounds of footsteps scurrying away. Then another sound came, a kind of puffing noise, followed by screeching metal. The screeching sounded intensely pained. James felt a cold shiver run down his back, and his mind thought back to that night as memories resurfaced. Then a big engine puffed across the screen. It was covered in rust, and had holes in its boiler that showed the boiler tubes. It rolled with a soft puffing sound, which at times sounded like 3 different engines at once. As it puffed past, no fire could be seen in the smoke box. The only light seemed to come from the little red tail lamp on its tender. Slowly, the engine rolled away from the camera, into the darkness, its red tail lamp the only thing in sight. Then the light flickered off, like someone had just flipped a switch.
"I later came back and turned the camera off, but you saw it, right?"
The young man asked.
Yes, we did,"
said the driver.
Are you sure you didn't alter this video?
James asked, his voice quivering.
"What? Why do you think I would do that?"
You university kids are too clever. That engine might be nothing more than a broken old model toy being pushed through a model railway set done with fancy editing.
"I'm serious!"
The student insisted.
"While I might be clever, I'm not this clever. Besides, didn't you see the engine? It didn't look anything like in any train spotter's book."
What do you mean?
James asked.
Does it look like Gordon, only with too many wheels?
Came a voice. The group turned to see Edward looking over towards them. The old engine had been quietly building up steam while they had been talking.
Yes, it did. I had to play the video back on my TV to see it better, but I did see more than 3 driving wheels on this engine,"
the student said. Edward looked down at his buffers and sighed.
Oh dear. Seems they are still around,
he said.
They? Who are they?
James asked, curious what Edward meant.
Well, they, for lack of a better word, are known as the Kildane Experiment. A tragic tale that took place long ago, and one that no one at the smelters dare speak of.
The group looked on as the old engine continued.
The Kildane Experiment began in 1966. Following the second act of the Beeching Acts, many engines were withdrawn from service and scrapped before their time. Young engines sent to old sidings to rust away and be cut up. It happened so quickly, scrapyards on the other railway became filled to capacity. It was because of this that some trains of scrap came to Sodor for processing. This was before our line became a heritage railway. That summer, a young but eccentric engineer from Crovan's Gate came to the scrapyard looking for work. Following this young man's employment, strange things began happening. Workers would sometimes come to begin cutting up a scrap engine, only to find that someone had already started, as many parts were missing. Soon it wasn't just parts, as a whole scrap engine vanished once. For a time, no one could explain what was happening. It seemed as if the engine ceased to exist. Even receipts recording their arrival at the scrapyard would vanish. Police would occasionally patrol the scrapyard by night, to keep watch for any break-ins, but none were reported. We were soon to find out what became of those parts. It was during one night when I'd just arrived with a delivery of petrol for the generators. We were just shunting them into their siding when suddenly there was a scream from one of the nearby sheds. The front doors flew open, and out came the young engineer, badly burnt. Before anyone could ask him what had happened, something big puffed out of the sheds in a cloud of steam. It was a monstrous-looking scrap engine. It had no face, just a rusty smokebox door. Its boiler and cab were from an A1, mounted crudely atop an 9F's chassis, pulling a rusty old tender behind it. Steam hissed and smoke billowed from its funnel and from its cab, which seemed to glow bright yellow. The hissing was pained, and at times it sounded like 3 engines puffing at once. The monstrous creation slowly puffed its way down the siding before coming to a stop on the points, when its corroded suspension springs finally snapped. When the paramedics and the police arrived, they asked the engineer what he'd been doing. He said he was trying to create a new engine that could revitalize steam on the mainland. He'd gotten a hold of the engine parts from the ironworks, using the place as a parts shop where he could scrounge up all the spare parts he could ever want. During his days off, he would sneak into the yard and steal more engine parts to complete his project. He managed to steal the complete scrap engine using a heavy hauler lorry owned by his brother, Frederick Packard, father to Jenny Packard, in fact. To hide his work, as he knew that all this scrap would be very valuable, he stole and altered receipts from the office to make it seem like no scrap engines had ever been delivered or engines arrived with fewer parts. He'd been in the process of test firing his creation when the water glass burst, spraying scalding steam and water all over him. His goals were terrible and foolish, and for his trouble he would endure many painful surgeries that would end up costing him the use of one of his hands and a lifetime of horrible scars.